Hello. For those of you that fancy fables and film, let's talk tall tales and high adventure. I'm Foxy Cellars, and I love the art of storytelling. Today I'm going to be ranking the Academy Awards Best Picture nominees for 2024 from worst to best. Before we do, if you would, click the like, subscribe to my channel. You'll get keyed into videos just like this in the future. Now today, and this is a kind of a lead-in to the Oscars, which is coming out soon, the 96th Academy Awards. They've announced the 10 best pictures. I'd like to rank all 10 from worst to best. Every year I try to see all of the films that are going to be nominated. So instead of me listing them all off, you'll see them in the background here. Typically when they nominate these aren't always what are considered the most entertaining films. Usually there's a bit of an artistic aesthetic to them. And usually if you break down all the facets of filmmaking, these are hitting the marks on all of them. So I have to recognize them. Going into the awards every year, I can't say that I necessarily want to see all these films. But when they announce the nominations, I usually will, go through, and maybe 50% of the ones that I wouldn't have seen necessarily end up being ones that impress the hell out of me. So that's why I do it every year. Every year when they announce them, I'm like, okay, well, I got to see all 10 or however many they're nominating then. I'm going to point out why it was probably nominated, what's really great about each of these films. I'm going to give you my opinion on them, and then I'm going to, of course, tell you which ones were my favorite as we get to the top of the list. Let's get started. Number 10, Zone of Interest, which was directed by Jonathan Glazer, and it's listed as a historical psychological horror. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a score of 92, which is 8th overall, and the audience gave it a score of 79, which is tied for 8th overall. My apologies, but I got to start with the worst one. That's how these worst to best go. Now this one, the undertones, the way it was presented anyway, that's what kind of made this movie what it was. Cinematically, it's impactful. It's almost kind of Kubrick-ish. The sound throughout the movie, it's very numbing. It almost feels like you're in a tunnel. I can't say I really connected with this as I would say that I connect with a Kubrick film, because I didn't. It was slow, and I was looking forward to it being over. I can see where it made its mark. It is a great piece of cinema in a way for some, but this is definitely not for everybody. It's not terrible, but it is last on my list because it's a story that's adjacent to something utterly horrific and monumental. It felt like you were visiting the house next door to Michael Myers. I mean, it's close to, but not there. Odd, but that's really the only way I can describe it. Nothing that spectacular. Number 9, Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, and this one is fashioned as a fantasy comedy. Barbie had a Rotten Tomatoes score of 88, which is Number 8, Poor Things, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. And this one's labeled specifically as a science fiction fantasy comedy drama. It had a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93, which was tied for 5th overall. And then it had an audience score of 79, which was tied for 8th overall with Zone of Interest. So full disclosure, I've never to this date enjoyed a Yorgos Lanthimos movie. Not one. I just find them all kind of just absurd Twilight Zone episodes. Not good ones. This one, though, has a bit more going for it, especially the visuals. It has a tinge of Terry Gilliam-ness to it. The concept is kind of like the Bride of Frankenstein comes to life in theory. However, in this instance, scientist Godwin Baxter, played by William Dafoe, resurrects this woman who died. However, he gives her the brain of the unborn child that she had in her womb. So you get to see kind of right from infancy, the development and growth of a child, but in the body of an adult. And this lays out the actions for the protagonist, who's, it's it's an infant in Frankenstein's body and discovering the absurd world. And you get to see the point of view of how absurd our world is, told by Yorgos, and how he's mapped this out. The acting is pretty much phenomenal. Like, it's like Emma Stone stands on her friggin' head in this movie. The cinematography is fantastic. The score is a bit chaotic. I mean, the instruments are played in what seemed to be an intentionally clunky way, which is fitting because, I mean, she doesn't even know how to use her body, so that works. And even though this may be his best movie that I've seen anyway, I did think about it after viewing it. So I can't say I loved it, but that's why it falls low on the list here. But it was worth the watch. Number 7, Past Lives, directed by Celine Song. And this one's labeled as a romantic drama, of course. It had a Rotten Tomatoes score of 96, which is tied for second. And then it had an audience score of 83, which was tied for sixth. It is one of 2, sort of 3 of the foreign films that were nominated. So you are seeing more foreign films nominated. So if you're not a fan of reading subtitles and whatnot, there's not enough here to compel you where I would recommend to see this to, the masses. But for those of you that can get past that, or even those of you that are not affected by that whatsoever, there are a couple things here that make this a very appealing movie. I was drawn to the notion of inescapable, lingering thoughts of lost love or old friendships, and the inability to move on, in this case, from like a childhood crush. It was done in a way that was very relatable, and I did feel the connection. On paper, it's a little over the top, if you were to have read what was going on, but the way it was executed, I found it very believable. And the disappointment that one would feel, when sometimes pursuing these endeavors felt very lifelike. It was just a realistic result. It's not wildly entertaining, but it does have a lot of heart, and there's a lot of value here. Number 6, Maestro, directed by Bradley Cooper, and this one is labeled as a biographical romantic drama. It had a Rotten Tomatoes score of 80, which was last place, and it had an audience score of 60, that's rather low, especially for a nominated film. And that was last place as well. However, I got something out of it, so I'm ranking it at 6th. And the reason for that, I felt that so many of the tiny, tiny little things about movie making were executed at like the highest level. The dialogue is superb. The acting is it's something else. I mean, it's really, you feel everything they feel. The development around everyone that surrounded Leonard is extremely well done. The music, okay, so obviously it's like seeing Amadeus. You're like, oh yeah, of course the music's fantastic. So the music did not disappoint, but it didn't stand out the way I thought it was going to. Those were the noticeable details to that point. Every scene, and if you watch this with decent speakers, you're picking up on very, very specific things. So I want to point out the sound, not the music, but the sound was some of the best sound in film I think I've ever seen. I mean, if you do have your, a good sound system, you're going to pick up on the wind in the background. You're going to pick up on the birds chirping. You're going to pick up on the atmosphere of the parties, and not just in a way that like, yeah, they're just pumping extra sound. Like it gave such perfect atmosphere to so many of the scenes. And then especially when you're in the theaters, the acoustics are so appropriate. Like you feel as if you're in a theater. You don't feel as if you're in a theater watching a movie of people in a theater. The little things that your average moviegoer doesn't necessarily pick up on were all done perfectly. I feel like Bradley Cooper has really excelled as a director on many levels. Outdoor shots had like exquisite lighting and composition, and just everything was done so perfectly. It's not a movie that requires a rewatch since it's not overly entertaining, but all in all, it is a beautiful piece of art. Number 5, Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese. And this one has been labeled as a Western crime drama, appropriately, of course. And this had a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93, which is tied with 5th overall. And then it had an audience score of 84, which is also 5th place. Now, this was a solid Scorsese film. It's rather a long movie, but it does move along, so you hardly notice it. And it has all the things that you expect from a Scorsese movie. It's violent. It's got unredeemable antagonists. But the first thing that stuck out when I started watching was the music, in fact, in this movie. And that is a thing about Martin Scorsese, is his movies are musicals in a way. And I don't know if everybody ever notices that. And I would say ever since The Color of Money, his movies have always had a musical element to them. This was not an exception at all. So Robbie Robertson, who recently passed away before this was released, he scored the music for this. And that is a standout character in the film. Absolutely. It has a clear blues element to it. All kinds of strings backing it up, like Fenders and banjos and additional tribal beats to it. So that is a signature piece to this that stands out. And it also makes it very different from some of the other Scorsese movies in the tone of the music. Lily Gladstone's performance, even though through most of the movie is somewhat subtle, it's definitely like she's likable, and it's just, she's done very, very well. There's this foundation of inner unflappable strength that comes just right through her eyes. I think she could win Best Actress for this. That if I'm a betting man, that would be I'd hedge my bet on that. If she wins, it's kind of like a full reversal from the days of and people probably don't remember this, but Marlon Brando sent Sacheen Littlefeather to the Academy of Podium to reject his Oscar for Godfather, which this was in a protest for the treatment of Native Americans. Now, it took more than 50 years, but it seems like poetic justice all the same. So I don't want her to win for that reason, but that gets tied into it when I kind of have the thinking of it when she wins, and it adds this satisfaction to it. But of the actresses I've seen, I think she should win. There seems to be some interest towards her winning. So I'm hopeful she wins. She deserves it. She absolutely deserves it. Now, this is not Scorsese's best movie. I wouldn't even put it in his top 5, but it does have the framework of his best movies, and it's probably in his top 10. So if you do like Scorsese, then you do have to see this movie. Absolutely. Number 4, The Holdovers, directed by Alexander Payne. And this one is a straight up comedy drama. It has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 97, which made it the highest Rotten Tomatoes score out of all the nominated films. And then its audience score was a 91, and that's tied for second. It was one of the ones where I had no interest in seeing it. It looked a lot like a typical stuck together, because of circumstances type film. But if you see it, it's more of a tone, slowly developing connection between teacher and pupil, more like Good Will Hunting. I was kind of expecting like a Breakfast Club type thing, but it was more Good Will Hunting than that. The atmosphere of the period is very well captured because it takes place somewhere at a boarding school. They're not specific, but a boarding school in Western Massachusetts during the 70s, I think like 71-ish. And I want to say it had like a Harold and Maude feel to it, which was, that was filmed then and had similar type music to it. It didn't have the dark humor of Harold and Maude, but it just had the essence, so to speak. And also it had like Cat Stevens music spread throughout. So, that adds to it. Lots of little set details and trends of the period are there. The only element that I found off-putting was the Boston accents. So there weren't any. These are all almost exclusively Boston natives, born and raised, but no one attempted to sound like they were from Boston. The most relatable and likable character was this black lunch lady whose husband had died and her son had passed away. And you're able to have like great empathy for her and her place in this film. And she's the only one that dropped like the tiny little sporadic accent throughout. She mentioned she wanted to go to a party and then, you know, she might have said something about like, what's the matter with you? And like just tiny little like emphasis on the A, but not a real Boston accent by any means. Now, this movie there's nothing mind-blowing about it, but if you thought you wanted to see it, you'll love it. If you didn't see anything appealing about it from the trailer, it probably will surprise you and at the very least mildly surprise you, but this is a solid movie. Number 3, Anatomy of a Fall, directed by Justine Triet, and this one is labeled as a legal drama thriller. And it was. This one had a Rotten Tomatoes score of 96, which is tied for second. And it had an audience score of 90, which was fourth place. Now, I did really like this movie. But here's the thing. So here's what you have. It's a legal drama that lays out multiple facts. It's ambiguous in the sense that you don't know actual details of what's happened, but you are able to surmise. If you've ever seen the documentary, it was called Staircase. It's very much like that. But that one was based on real events. This one, I believe, is made up. This has all the elements of a real murder case. Sandra Hüller, who plays the wife suspected of murdering her husband, and she's really great in it. She was in the Zone of Interest also, too. So that one deserves less of a mention, but she's fantastic in this. She speaks German, French, and English in this. But it's very easy to follow along. You know, they kind of bounce around from different languages. It reminded me of Witness for the Prosecution, the Billy Wilder film, but with an air of like Hitchcock to it, you know, versus Billy Wilder. There are some red herrings, I would say, that they kind of drop throughout that allow for your mind to wander, to suspect, to leave wanting more with respect to the mind's imagination, which is really great. I mean, I guess that makes it like a creative person's film. I like that. And I think this is, an intelligent exercise in the field of ambiguity. I'm not sure it's for everybody, but I definitely enjoyed it. And I probably will give this another watch because I'm going to pick up additional things that on the second watch. Or even the third watch. Number 2, American Fiction, directed by Cord Jefferson. And this one is a straight up comedy drama. It has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 94. That's fourth overall. And then it has an audience score of 95, which was first place. So according to the audience, this was their favorite movie. It's a rather enjoyable film that you're going to smile throughout. It follows this writing professor who, on a goof, he just writes this stereotypical black novel, but it's taken very seriously by the masses. So they just misinterpret his sarcasm in writing this. The plot is, and this is literally the plot of a Family Guy episode where Brian had written a book, just to make fun of those types of books. But succeeded in connecting with everyone, with all the readers. And it has this underlying social themes that takes, it seems like it takes a lot from like Monty Python's Life of Brian, but it's executed totally different. I mean that in the way that the writing analyzes how society misinterprets the meaning of things to be deeper than they really are. Now, you have Jeffrey Wright in this. And he seems like somebody that takes a lot of time to pick very appropriate roles for himself. And I feel like this is one of them. I mean, he had that role in Westworld that was very serious and very dry, but he's, wildly intelligent, robotically wildly intelligent, if you know what I mean. And then his voice in The Watcher, the What If cartoon, so appropriate. It's funny. Everyone gets solid lines that were written for them as well in this too. It's not just him. This one doesn't need a lot of explanation other than it's just a really entertaining comedy. So I do recommend you see it. And finally, my number one pick for the 96th Academy Awards Best Picture, Oppenheimer, directed by Christopher Nolan, and this is a biographical thriller. It has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93, which is tied for 5th, and then it has an audience score of 91, which was tied for 2nd. Okay, so Nolan is a cinematic genius. Every bit of fundamental movie making is not only present in his films, but he excels his ingenuity is just beyond reason. Like, this story would have been so less compelling had any other director tried to tackle it. He has a way of intensifying the drama, embellishing the urgency, humanizing the tension. I don't want to go too much into the plot. It's the performances are really what we have here. But I will touch on something that he did that makes every scene powerful, and that's his use of what's called the shepherd tone. It's the illusion that the music or the sound, in some cases, is infinitely rising. The illusion is created by, like, they stack scales on top of each other, and they are like an octave apart. I don't really know exactly how that works, but something to do with fading the treble and raising the bass during scale transitions, but leaving the alto as it is to create the feeling of this rise in pitch. And that, my friends, is the perfect example of Nolan's attention to sleight of hand and execution of just sheer excellence, even in the fundamentals of creating like an immersive cinematic experience. This was the best movie, so you have to see every one of Christopher Nolan's movie. But with that said, you also have to see Oppenheimer. That's just his most recent fantastic piece of cinema. Well, that's my list. I want to thank you for watching. I'm predicting that Oppenheimer will win. It's not every year that my prediction also is aligned with which one is my favorite film. But this year, yeah, I think Oppenheimer is going to win, and that's also my favorite film. Hope you enjoyed the list. If you've seen a bunch of these movies or even seen some of these movies and you have differing opinions of mine or similar, please go ahead, comment below. Click the like for this video. Subscribe to my channel. It'll help out my channel. It'll drive more views to my channel, and you'll be keyed into videos just like this in the future when I release them. I'm Foxy Cellars, and I want to thank you for watching. Have a great day.